The night was dark and heavy, filled with the kind of silence that only a deserted street in Palm Springs can bring. I remember it like it was yesterday. The RCA mobile recording truck pulled up to my house, big and imposing, like a giant mechanical beast ready to swallow the night. Inside, the tape of the 4 instrumental tracks from the Stax sessions was already set up, waiting for me to lay down my voice. The microphones were placed right in the middle of my living room, but there was a problem: no monitor speakers. It was like trying to sing in the dark, and it made everything harder. The room was tense. One of the singers, a guy I'd asked to get a hair transplant right there in the house, was bleeding from his bandaged head. Blood stained his shirt and his face was pale, but he was determined to push through. I felt bad for him, but I couldn't let it distract me. I had a job to do. RCA wanted me to finish those 4 tracks, but I had other plans. I spent a lot of time cutting demos of my own songs, hoping to build up my fledgling publishing operation. RCA didn't like that, and they made sure I paid for it myself, but I didn't care. I was in control, and I was going to do things my way. I managed to finish one of the tracks, Sweet Angeline, but the rest just didn't feel right. Instead, I decided to record a song by Donnie Sumner, I Miss You. I promised him I'd take care of the publishing, and he seemed grateful. Then Cheryl Nielsen sat down at the piano and played a song he'd performed as a kid at a talent contest. It was Are You Sincere, an Andy Williams hit. I liked it, and it became the final cut for the album. When the basic tracks were done, the Colonel told me no more overdubs could be added. The tracks had to stay as they were. He also suggested strongly to RCA that Felton Jarvis, my producer, shouldn't work on the album anymore. I didn't like that idea, but I couldn't do much about it. The album Raised on Rock and the single For All Time's Sake were released in September 1973. They didn't do well, and RCA saw it as a sign that they needed to get rid of Felton, but I wasn't about to let them fire him. I hadn't taken direction from the label in over 15 years, and I wasn't going to start now. Then there was another problem. Joan Deary, my ex-manager, had scheduled another album with old masters and unreleased material to come out at the same time as Raised on Rock. The Colonel was furious. He did everything he could to delay the release of Elvis, a legendary performer, Vol. 1. He succeeded, and it was finally released in January. It was a huge success, selling 700,000 copies. It was a brutal reminder that my past glories were still more popular than my current work. On October 9, 1973, Priscilla and I walked out of a Santa Monica courthouse. Our divorce was final. The newspapers showed us as composed and friendly, but it was all for show. A few days later, I was rushed to the hospital with breathing and congestion problems. They said I was drying out, but I don't remember much of it. After I was released, I went to Linda Thompson's parents' house. Her brother, Sam, recorded me singing a few old favorites. It felt good to be singing again, even if it was just for fun. RCA couldn't get rid of Felton, so they tried to gain control over the technical aspects of the upcoming December sessions. I insisted on going back to Stax Studios, where I felt comfortable. They brought in a New York engineer named Mike Morin, who had a lot of experience. He brought 2 16-track tape machines, and we had a team of engineers to make sure everything ran smoothly. The first night, we started with I Got a Feeling in My Body, a song by Dennis Lind. It was a funky, rhythmic, religious number, and I was excited to record it. I was still a bit overweight and wearing a cape, but I was eager to get back into the groove. We did a few takes, and by the 7th one, my voice was starting to wear out, but take 3 was perfect, and we moved on. The next night, we tackled It's Midnight, a ballad by Jerry Chestnut. It was a song about late-night loneliness, and it hit close to home. I worked on it for hours, and by take 19, I had poured every bit of emotion into it. Felton tried to push me to do more, but I was done. I listened to the playback and drove home to Graceland. The next night, I was in a better mood. We started with You Asked Me To, a song by Waylon Jennings. I finished it on the 2nd try, but Felton wanted more. We went through a few more takes, and by the 6th one, we had what we needed. Then we moved on to If You Talk in Your Sleep, a song by Red West. It was a smoky soul number, and we created a propulsive bass and drum-heavy arrangement. We finished the master, but the session ended early because there was no food. I apologized to the group and left, feeling a mix of frustration and satisfaction. The next few days were a blur of recording, with songs like Mr. Songman, Thinking About You, and Loving Arms. Each night, I poured everything I had into the music, trying to make it better than the last. It wasn't easy, but it was what I lived for. The music was my life, and no matter what happened, I was going to keep singing. The group voice was becoming a permanent part of Elvis's music scene. They had a deal with Elvis that included a publishing arrangement, which meant they brought new songs to the sessions, both their own and those of their friends. Lamar Fike, one of Elvis's old friends, wasn't happy about this. He felt like his role was being taken over by these newcomers. One time, while Elvis was recording a song called Mr. Songman by Donnie Sumner, Lamar was really upset. He asked, "Who wrote this piece of garbage?" But Elvis stuck with his new friends, even releasing Mr. Songman as the B-side of a single. The Colonel, Elvis's manager, wanted to increase publishing income, so Elvis kept working with the new guys. One of the new songs, Thinking About You, was written by Tim Beatty. It was a bit different from what the band usually played, but it ended up on a single B-side too. They brought a lot of demos to the session, and some were really good. Bringing It Back by Greg Gordon and Help Me by Larry Gatlin were two of the best. Help Me became one of Elvis's favorite songs to perform live. They recorded Help Me in just one take, and Elvis even dropped to his knees to sing it. The next night, Elvis started with a song called My Boy. It was a sad song about losing a child through divorce, and Elvis wanted to get it done quickly. When the producer, Felton, asked for a third take, Elvis got really angry. He said, "I told you to get this thing in 2 takes. I can't sing it anymore." But the third take was actually better. Felton knew he could fix the long fade out later, so he didn't ask for another take. Then they moved on to Loving Arms by Tom Jans. This song was perfect for Elvis's voice, and it made the musicians play their best. When Felton asked for a third take, everyone was relieved because it turned out to be perfect. Good Time Charlie's Got the Blues was another great song. Elvis left out a verse about taking pills, but the final take was amazing. The next song was supposed to be for a gospel album, but they only got to one song that night, Talk About the Good Times by Jerry Reed. The keyboards and guitars were really fast and exciting. David Briggs, who wrote the next song, We Had It All, was excited because he had the publishing rights. The song was about a marriage breakup, but they couldn't get the right feeling for it. They tried and tried, but finally decided to try again the next night. Elvis really wanted to get it right, but in the end he said, "I just don't know how to improve this." To unwind, they played Chuck Berry's Promised Land. Elvis was in control and noticed a wrong note from the rhythm guitarist, Johnny Christopher. He gently pointed it out after they finished the song. The guitar and the clavinet had a fun duel, and Elvis was having a great time. He even sang a bit of Columbus Stockade Blues, which made his cousin Billy Smith happy. The next song, Your Love's Been a Long Time Coming, by Rory Burke, was a medium-tempo pop song. It was a bit predictable but very melodic, and Elvis really liked it. They worked late into the night, and Elvis kept listening to the playback over and over. By 4:30 a.m., everyone was tired, but Elvis's dad was visiting, and Elvis felt too good to stop. He joked with the band and gently scolded them, just like he used to do in the old days. He even snored loudly through the intro of the next song, There's a Honky-Tonk Angel, to get everyone to play better. By 6 a.m., they had finished the song, and everyone went home tired but happy. On the final night, Elvis's voice sounded stronger and clearer than it had at the beginning. They played If That Isn't Love, a spiritual song by Dottie Rambo, and Spanish Eyes, a song Elvis had recorded earlier. They did it in a light-hearted way, which made it even better. They finished the session by recording She Wears My Ring by Ray Price, a song Elvis had been singing for years. 1973 was a year of highs and lows for Elvis. He had the big success of Aloha from Hawaii, but then he faced problems with his health, weight, and divorce. The December sessions at Stax gave him hope, and he recorded 18 new songs in just a week. It felt like things were turning around. In 1974, things were a bit calmer. Elvis didn't record any new studio albums, but he toured a lot, which was where he made his money. The Colonel wanted another live album, so they recorded a concert in Memphis on March 20th. It was Elvis's first show in Memphis since 1961, so it was a big deal. They recorded songs like Let Me Be There, Why Me Lord, and Help Me. The best moment was probably How Great Thou Art, which won Elvis his third Grammy for Best Sacred Recording. The album from the Memphis show was called Elvis as Recorded Live on Stage in Memphis. It had some great pictures of Graceland, but no new photos of Elvis. The album did better than the studio albums, but Elvis's record sales were still not as strong as they used to be. Only his biggest fans were still buying his records, while his live shows were always sold out. There was a bit of tension at RCA because of the new album. Joan Deary, who worked at RCA, thought Felton Jarvis, Elvis's producer, wasn't doing a good job. She suggested that Felton be replaced, but Elvis didn't want to let him go. The December sessions improved things, but the album still didn't sell well. Joan and RCA lost the battle over Felton, and Elvis stuck with him. Instead of trying new things, Elvis retreated into his comfort zone, which made him a bit bored. In August 1974, Elvis had some studio rehearsals in Hollywood. They worked on songs like Softly As I Leave You and The 12th of Never. These sessions were recorded on a low-quality cassette tape, but they showed Elvis still trying to find new sounds and ideas. Even though things were tough, Elvis kept working and trying to find his way back to the top. Elvis and I had a lot going on in 1975. The Las Vegas shows were a mix of excitement and chaos. He was rehearsing a bunch of new songs, like If You Talk in Your Sleep and Promised Land, but a lot of that new stuff ended up not making it to the stage. Elvis was working really hard, but he seemed more focused on songs that didn't do well when they were released, like I'm Leaving, and The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face. He even added some new, unrecorded songs like The 12th of Never and Softly As I Leave You. There was one song he really liked, If You Love Me, Let Me Go by Olivia Newton-John. He thought it was happy, even though some people thought it was a bit boring, but the shows in Vegas were getting a bit weird. Elvis was acting out of control, and he kept talking a lot on stage. On the last night, he only sang one song and then started talking about his divorce, his health, and his financial issues. He even introduced people who weren't there, like Bill Cosby, and talked about a liver biopsy he had. It was a bit of a mess, and the audience probably felt like they were watching a train wreck. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, tried to make the best of it. He put out a record called Having Fun with Elvis on Stage, which was just Elvis talking. It sold pretty well, but the mood back at Graceland wasn't so optimistic. Elvis looked tired and unhealthy, and he had to cancel a show at the Hilton for January 1975 because he wasn't in good shape. In February, Elvis had to go to the hospital for some health issues, including an enlarged colon and eye problems. The doctors were trying to help him get off drugs, but it was tough because some of his friends were still giving him drugs. His dad, Vernon, had a heart attack and had to stay in the same hospital for a while. After all that, Elvis went to Los Angeles to prepare for a shorter show in Vegas. He also scheduled some recording sessions at RCA Studios. On March 10th, we started with Fairytale, a song by the Pointer Sisters. Elvis had trouble with the high notes, so it was a bit of a struggle. Next was Green, Green Grass of Home, which Elvis loved because he heard Tom Jones's version on the radio a few years ago. He did great on that one. Then we did I Can Help by Billy Swan, which Elvis joked about but still nailed on the first try. He sang And I Love You So for his girlfriend Sheila Ryan, and it was a beautiful, delicate performance. Susan, When She Tried, was a bit of a struggle at first, but we got it done after a few tries. The bass player, Duke Bardwell, had a tough time. Elvis didn't really like his playing, and Felton, the producer, ended up erasing all of his parts and replacing them with other bass players. The only song where Duke's bass made it to the final cut was Trouble, a rock song by Jerry Chestnut. Elvis really got into that one. After a break, we did a jam session of Tiger Man, and it was a lot of fun. Everyone got to play, and it was a great moment. We finished the night with Woman Without Love and Shake a Hand, 2 more covers. Elvis didn't put as much effort into these, as he did with the earlier songs. The next day, Elvis wanted to do a cover of Country Bumpkin by Cal Smith, but he changed his mind and decided not to do it. We also recorded Bringin' It Back, a new song by Greg Gordon. Tony Brown, the new piano player for the backup group, got to play on this one. It was a nice song, but Elvis's publishing companies tried to claim part of it, which was a bit of a hassle. Despite all the challenges, we managed to get a lot of good songs recorded. Felton was hopeful, but Elvis was always unpredictable. It was a wild time, and we never knew what would happen next. I remember those days in 1975, when Elvis was working on his new album. He needed just one more song to complete it, and Troy Seals's ballad Pieces of My Life was the perfect fit. Elvis poured his heart into it, singing about his regrets with such sincerity that it was clear he had a few of his own. He listened to the playback over and over, keeping all the musicians waiting at full session rate. Felton, the engineer, transferred the master tape to a cassette, and Elvis listened to it at least 30 times. It was like he couldn't get enough of it. One morning, things got a bit crazy. Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys burst into the studio, demanding to meet Elvis. Brian had been recording his solo album Next Door, and was insistent. The room was filled with people from both their entourages, and the commotion made it impossible to continue recording. Elvis didn't need distractions, and that meeting definitely put a stop to the session. The next night, rehearsals for Elvis's upcoming Las Vegas engagement began. They picked 5 new songs from the recent sessions, along with older hits like Tomorrow Night and Wear My Ring Around Your Neck. They tried a couple of Don Robertson ballads, but didn't like them. Elvis also had a bunch of unrecorded songs he thought could work, but they never became regular features in the show. Songs like Susie Q, You Can Have Her, and You're the Reason I'm Living were just ideas that never took off. The rough mixes of the new album, made by RCA engineer Rick Ruggery, caused some tension. Elvis was furious when he heard them, and demanded that Felton remix and overdub everything in Nashville before it could be released. The album was already behind schedule, so they compromised on a single. They paired an unrepaired Trouble with a recording of Mr. Songman from the year before. After that, RCA didn't try to control Elvis's recordings anymore. Despite his ups and downs, Elvis was still a big draw in Las Vegas and on the road. As long as he kept singing and performing, he could keep making money. His live shows were solid, but they lacked the spark they once had. RCA documented some of these shows on an album called Elvis Aaron Presley, The Silver Box. In May and June of 1975, Elvis recorded several live shows. The engineer, Bill Porter, and the band, including James Burton on guitar and Kathy Westmoreland on vocals, captured performances in places like Murfreesboro, Houston, Dallas, Shreveport, and Jackson. The recordings were edited to simulate a complete live concert, but they were never meant for release while Elvis was alive. They were just for reference. Elvis seemed to find more enjoyment in business ventures, like an unrealized karate documentary, than in his live performances. Music was his job, but his artistic drive seemed to be fading. He tried to update the show by taking requests from the audience, but that only lasted a few performances before the August Las Vegas engagement was canceled. Elvis ended up in the hospital again. RCA and the Colonel tried to package the material they had. The album Promised Land featured the remaining 1973 Stax material, but it didn't do well on the charts. The album Today, recorded in March 1975, did even worse. Old hits were still popular, and a mid-price compilation called Pure Gold sold really well for years. The Colonel even schemed to put out an album for kids, but it wasn't released until after Elvis's death. While recovering at Graceland, Elvis started working on new material for the rescheduled Las Vegas engagement in December. He suggested a new album combining studio and live recordings from the show, but only 2 new songs, America the Beautiful and Softly As I Leave You, made it into the performance. The idea for the album was dropped. In 1976, Elvis showed a growing disinterest in both recording and his life. Cheryl Nielsen, a member of the backup singers, said Elvis told him he was bored. His producer, Felton Jarvis, heard the same thing. I'm so tired of being Elvis Presley. It was getting hard to get Elvis to go back into the studio, but they finally broke the stalemate by bringing the recording truck to Graceland. They turned the jungle room into a studio, and despite some technical issues, Elvis was thrilled with the setup. Felton hoped to record 20 new masters, enough for 2 albums, but the reality was different. The Graceland sessions in February 1976 were intense. They managed to record songs like Bitter They Are, Harder They Fall, She Thinks I Still Care, and The Last Farewell. Some songs, like Solitaire, took a lot of time to get right. Elvis struggled with I'll Never Fall in Love Again, a Tom Jones hit, but he eventually nailed Moody Blue, a strong commercial song. They finished the session with a decent performance of the Tom Jones song, and Felton made up for the shortcomings in the overdub. Elvis's passion for music was fading, but he still had moments of brilliance. The Graceland sessions were a mix of frustration and achievement, and they captured a side of Elvis that was both vulnerable and determined. Even as his interest waned, he kept pushing, trying to find that spark one more time. It was a tough time. More than 13 hours had passed, and we'd only managed to record 2 songs. Felton, our producer, had to go back to RCA and ask for an extra $30,000. It wasn't just Felton's mistake, though. We started 5 days late, and some of the best musicians, like Jerry Sheff and James Burton, had to leave early to go on tour with Emmylou Harris. Then there was Elvis. He would spend hours on songs like Feelings, or sing every Platters song he knew. It was hard to keep him focused. Through Bob Beckham, Felton found some good songs that didn't need Elvis's publishing people to approve them. One of these was For the Heart by Dennis Linde. Elvis seemed to really enjoy it, and the band was fired up. James Burton did some great guitar work, and Jerry Sheff's bass added a cool, swampy feel, but the real standout was Hurt. Elvis loved Roy Hamilton's version from the 50s, and when he sang it, it was like he poured his heart out. It was one of the best recordings of his later years. Grail Marcus, a famous music critic, later called it apocalyptic. After Hurt, we tried Danny Boy. Elvis asked David Briggs to raise the key, but it was too high for him. He said, "I can't make it. I've got too much shit in me, man." He was tired and accepting of his limits. We worked hard, and by the 10th take, we had a good version. By the time we finished, it was 2 in the afternoon, and we'd been recording for 17 hours. Elvis joked, "Bring out the booze, Grandma," because his grandma lived in a room near the kitchen. The next night, Elvis tried to loosen up the band, but the room's acoustics were bad. There was a funny mix-up when Ronnie Tutt said a take was all drums, and Elvis thought he said drunk. He laughed it off, but the session was short, and we only got 2 songs that night. When 3 of the key musicians left the next day, Felton had to shuffle some things around. David Briggs moved from electric keyboard to piano, and we brought in Norbert Putnam on bass and Billy Sanford on guitar. Elvis wanted to record America the Beautiful, but he was too blurry to explain what he wanted. We ended up recording Willie Nelson's Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain instead. Elvis was tired and a bit irritated, but we managed to get a good take. The session ended at 7 a.m., and the next day's session was canceled. Felton went to a studio in Murfreesboro to overdub and mix the recordings. He was disappointed with how costly and unproductive the sessions were, but he was still excited about some of the songs, especially Danny Boy and Hurt. A month later, he told me about Danny Boy and how incredible David Briggs's piano playing was. The album, From Elvis Presley Boulevard, Memphis, Tennessee, came out a few months later. The cover was unflattering, but the songs were good. Hurt and For the Heart were the best, but the album only reached number 28 on the charts. RCA also released 2 other albums in 1976, a compilation of rare early cuts and a long overdue Sun Sessions LP. Elvis's albums were still selling, but the fan base was shrinking. The next Graceland session was set for October 29th, right after Elvis's tour. The RCA truck and crew showed up early, and Mike Morin, our engineer, brought better equipment. The band from Elvis's road show arrived at 9 p.m., and we started recording. The first song was It's Easy for You by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice. The lyrics fit Elvis's life perfectly. He was losing his companion, Linda Thompson, and his relationship with some old friends was falling apart. Elvis joked about the band's mistakes, but he was serious about the music. He wanted to get it right. We recorded Way Down, a rocker by Lang Martin Jr., and it sounded great. Elvis was in a good mood, and the band sounded better than ever. Chip Young suggested Pledging My Love, an old Johnny Ace song. Elvis really connected with it, and the band built on it in a way that was different from their usual style. The next night, we started without Elvis on a song called There's a Fire Down Below, written by Jerry Sheff. When Elvis finally arrived, he tried to keep the band focused, but they were making jokes and using a lot of bad language. Elvis left, and we recorded an instrumental version of He'll Have to Go. It was Halloween, and Elvis came back later dressed like a gangster. The costume party ended the session early. The next day, Elvis apologized and said he wasn't feeling well. We were left with only 4 new songs and 2 for the new single. RCA scheduled another session for January, but Elvis never showed up. Felton used the time to add overdubs to the songs from October. It was a tough time, but we had some great moments in the studio. Month after month, I watched as Felton's requests for recording sessions with Elvis went unanswered. The Colonel kept Elvis on the road touring all the time, making it almost impossible to get any studio work done. The only option left was to catch something during one of the tours, hoping Elvis might try out a new or unusual song that he hadn't recorded before. But even then, the quality of Elvis's performances was a huge concern. Some nights he was so out of it that he could barely sing. On good nights, his performances were uninspired. There were times when things got so bad that everyone involved wondered how much longer this could go on. Elvis, who had been one of the world's most famous celebrities for 2 decades, was declining in health, but it seemed like no one was talking about it. Sure, some reviewers called him overweight, bloated, and tired, but with sold-out concerts and angry fan letters to the newspapers, there was enough doubt that the rest of the world barely noticed. Since Aloha from Hawaii, nothing had really put Elvis back in the headlines. The albums after 1973 were mostly forgettable, and the media didn't seem to care much about his career anymore. But the loyal fans couldn't get enough of Elvis, even though he was tired of the whole thing. It was all he knew how to be, and it was the only way he could support himself and everyone around him. In the spring of 1977, Felton and I went on a tour to try to record some live material. We followed Elvis from Oklahoma to Michigan, Wisconsin, and Illinois, hoping to find something worth using. We ended up with some primitive 4-track recordings, but there were only a few songs that could make the cut. There was a funny version of Little Darlin', a light-hearted If You Love Me Let Me Know, and a decent take on Unchained Melody. But Unchained Melody was another tribute to Roy Hamilton, and it was clear that Elvis was struggling. The Colonel, always looking for quick money, negotiated a new TV deal. He knew that Elvis's performances were getting worse, but the only motivation was the cash. There was no reason for Elvis to try to attract a new audience or even rally his fans with another TV show, but the deal was made, and we filmed the footage for the special at 2 shows in Omaha, Nebraska, and Rapid City, South Dakota. The first show in Omaha was a disaster. Elvis looked bloated and pale, and his performance was all over the place. He stumbled through the songs, and at one point he stopped during Are You Lonesome Tonight, and said to himself, And I am, and I was. It was a heartbreaking moment. The cameras caught everything, but CBS was sure that most of it was unusable. Our only hope was the second show in Rapid City, and even that was just barely good enough to salvage the special. Felton had been traveling with the tour for months, trying to collect material for the new album, Moody Blue. He ended up discarding most of the recordings because they were so bad. He managed to compile an album with 10 songs, but 4 of them had already been on singles, and one was a 1974 recording of Let Me Be There. The new single was Way Down, which had some life to it, and Pledging My Love, which was passionate. But after all the poor performances he had recorded, Felton now had to make a Hawaii-style double album from the TV special, which could only hurt Elvis's image. The next tour was supposed to start in Portland, Maine on August 16th, but that morning Elvis died. It was a shock to everyone, and a new tabloid life began. The Colonel, always thinking about money, said it was like when Elvis went into the army. He meant that after Elvis's death, a global rush to buy Presley merchandise started, and things began selling again like they did in 1956. At first, there was a lot of mean talk and snide comments about Elvis in the media, but it was a tragic turn from the hopeful image he had started with. Over time, the sniping faded, and people started to show a new interest in Elvis as a performer. Even before he died, RCA had noticed a demand for unreleased music, and in the years after 1977, they released a lot of new material. They found countless gems in the RCA vaults and from Graceland, and put out box sets covering Elvis's whole career. When the first of these, The King of Rock and Roll, the complete 50s masters, sold over 500,000 sets, it seemed like all the agendas of the Colonel, RCA, and Elvis had finally come together. By then, Elvis Presley's name had become its own definition, embodying all the contradictions and beauty of his music at its best. We may never agree on anything the way we agreed on Elvis. What we agreed on most was his music. I remember the days when music was something special, something you held close to your heart. It wasn't just about the tunes, but the stories they told and the feelings they evoked. For me, Elvis Presley was more than just a singer. He was a legend, a voice that spoke to the soul of a generation. In 1957, I was just a teenager, but I knew I was living through something incredible. Elvis had already become a household name, and his music was everywhere. I still have the album Loving You, which came out in July of that year. It was a collection of songs that made my heart race and my feet tap. Mean Woman Blues was a favorite, with its raw energy and powerful vocals. Teddy Bear was sweet and catchy, and Blueberry Hill was a classic that brought a smile to my face every time I heard it. That same year, Elvis released Elvis Christmas Album in October. It was a magical collection of holiday songs that brought a new kind of warmth to the season. Santa Claus is Back in Town was a rock and roll Santa that no one had ever heard before, and Blue Christmas was a bittersweet reminder that not everyone's holidays were joyful. The album also included some gospel songs like Peace in the Valley and Take My Hand, Precious Lord, which showed a different side of Elvis, one that was deeply spiritual and moving. The following year, 1958, was another big year for Elvis. In March, he released Elvis Golden Records, a compilation of his biggest hits. It was like a greatest hits album, before the term was even invented. Songs like Hound Dog, All Shook Up, and Heartbreak Hotel were on there, and they were still just as powerful as when they first came out. It was a testament to how much he had already accomplished in such a short time. In April, he released Wear My Ring Around Your Neck, and in June, Hard-Headed Woman. Both singles were hits, but Hard-Headed Woman really stood out for me. It was a bluesy, soulful track that showed Elvis could do more than just rock and roll. He had a depth to his voice that could convey so much emotion. 1959 brought more music and more memories. Elvis by Request and Flaming Star were part of an EP that included Are You Lonesome Tonight and It's Now or Never. These songs were some of the most beautiful and heartfelt he had ever recorded. It's Now or Never was a ballad that could make you cry, and Are You Lonesome Tonight was a song that spoke to the loneliness and longing that everyone feels at some point. In 1960, Elvis was back with a vengeance. Elvis is Back was an LP that came out in April, and it was a return to form. Fever and The Girl of My Best Friend were standout tracks that showed he was still the king of rock and roll. But it was Elvis Golden Records Vol. 2 that really captured the essence of his early career. It was a collection of his greatest hits, including I Need Your Love Tonight, One Night, and A Big Hunk O' Love. The early 1960s saw Elvis venturing into different genres, and His Hand in Mine was a gospel album that came out in November 1960. It was a deeply personal album, with songs like His Hand in Mine and I'm Gonna Walk Dem Golden Stairs, that spoke to his faith and his belief in something greater than himself. 1961 brought more movie soundtracks like Blue Hawaii and Follow That Dream, but it was the LP Something for Everybody that really stood out. It was a mix of pop and rock, with songs like There's Always Me and Give Me the Right that showed Elvis could do it all. The years went by and Elvis continued to evolve. In 1963, Elvis Golden Records Vol. 3 was another compilation that included some of his most beloved songs, and Fun in Acapulco was a soundtrack that brought a taste of Mexico to my living room. 1964 and 1965 were filled with more hits, like Kissin' Cousins, Viva Las Vegas, and roustabout. Each album brought something new, something that kept me coming back for more. Girl Happy in 1965 was a particular favorite, with its catchy tunes and upbeat vibe. As the 1960s came to a close, Elvis was still going strong. How Great Thou Art in 1967 was another gospel album that showed his spiritual side, and From Elvis in Memphis in 1969 was a return to the soulful, powerful music that made him famous. In the Ghetto and Suspicious Minds were two of his best songs, and they solidified his place in music history. The late 1960s and early 1970s saw more live albums, like On Stage, and From Memphis to Vegas, From Vegas to Memphis. These albums captured the energy and passion of Elvis' live performances, showing that he was still the king of rock and roll, no matter how many years had passed. Every album, every song was a piece of history. They were the soundtrack to my life, and they were the reason I fell in love with music. Elvis wasn't just a singer. He was a part of my world, a part of my memories. And even now, when I listen to those old records, I can still feel the magic, the energy, and the love that Elvis put into every note. Well, it's been a wild ride, hasn't it? From the early days of Heartbreak Hotel to the last notes of Moody Blue, I've been on quite a journey. It's amazing to look back at all the songs, the albums, and the memories that shaped my career and my life. It all started back in the 1950s with those early hits like Heartbreak Hotel and Hound Dog. I was just a kid from Memphis, but the music was in my blood. I remember those first recordings at Sun Studios, where I cut tracks like That's All Right and Blue Moon of Kentucky. It was a different world back then, and the rock and roll sound was just starting to take off. As the years went by, I kept evolving. I made movies and my music changed too. There were country songs, gospel songs, and even some really sweet ballads. Albums like Elvis Now and Elvis Country showed a different side of me, and I think people really connected with that. I even did a whole Christmas album, which was a lot of fun. The live shows were always special. I loved performing, and the energy of the crowd was electric. Whether it was at the International Hotel in Las Vegas or Madison Square Garden in New York, those concerts were some of the best moments of my life. I remember the excitement of Aloha from Hawaii, and how it felt to sing to millions of people around the world. But it wasn't just about the hits. There were a lot of deep, meaningful songs that I really connected with, like If I Can Dream and How Great Thou Art. Those songs helped me through tough times, and gave me a way to express my faith and my feelings. Looking back, I'm proud of all the music I made and the memories I created. It's been a roller coaster, but I wouldn't change a thing. I hope that my music continues to touch people's hearts and bring them joy, just like it did for me. Thanks for being on this journey with me. It's been a blast, and I can't wait to see what the future holds. Keep the music alive and remember, no matter what, it's always about the love.